Nader, welcome to the show, my man. How's everything with yourself?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, all is well, man. I'm alive and happy, so I can't really complain.
Oh, great. Well,
Yeah.
look, I've thoroughly enjoyed researching you from the moment I found out what you've done with NASA, the government, and all that sort of stuff. You've been an absolute like gem, and every time I found something else, it's like dug up more treasure to kind of go in search for researching with you. But I feel I would be doing an injustice if I didn't ask this question for someone who's in space tech, for someone who's been in governments, strategist, consultant, XYZ, the works. With current situations, I'd love to get this in from the word go. And someone who's got your like skill set, education, foresight, vision, what are your current thoughts on everything that's going on right now?
Well, I think that so I did a talk about this at the beginning of the pandemic, and I framed this into what I call the evolutionary revolutionary cycle, and that essentially means that we're consistently growing like this, but there are kind of two cycles that take place. One is the evolutionary, and that's kind of like your 2008, 2001. And so all these changes happening, but they're evolutionary, they're not revolutionary. Revolutionary is like when the rules change, but we're inside the process as we speak right now. So the rules are changing as we speak. So old rules are being obsoleted and new rules are being created. And it's a painful process. It creates a lot of anxiety, like we were talking about prior to, we were talking about this before. And it's not an easy thing. But the point, though, is anybody who's in innovation knows that your worst enemy is the status quo, right? Things that are done the same way all the time would have no precedence for innovation anyways. And that would mean nothing would move forward. Everything would just kind of stay the same. You'd be surprised how many people just love the comfort zone of just staying the same. That doesn't really work. There are periods of time in your life where you need stability. That I get it, or even an organization. But ultimately, the only thing that is inevitable is change, right? And if we don't embrace change and understand evolutionary and revolutionary cycles, and by the way, that doesn't apply to countries and societies and companies, but it applies to us as individuals as well. And there's some theory behind it when it comes to individuals, when it comes to psychology, where they estimate by the age of 25, you wouldn't be able to really do change. And don't get alarmed by that, because there's some people before that age who embrace change as a way of life. And then there are people who learn through trauma after that. And you'll recognize and know who you are immediately, or people around you, where some major thing happens in your life and that revolution then puts you into a whole new evolutionary cycle. Ultimately, we would like to live life not like that. We'd like to be able to see these things and obviously change with the time. So that's where we are right now. And the other thing, and this is really strange for people in the strategy world, when I say, when there's uncertainty, which is the time we're in right now, and this is good old classic art of war stuff, is that you do nothing, right? And do nothing doesn't mean inactive. What it means is that you need to stop and be highly observant and discover what is about to come. Past data is not necessarily going to give us the foresight it would have given us, like in the past. A lot of the elements, as we said, like as we go through this revolutionary cycle, rules are changing, right? How do you calculate a changed rule if you're looking at it by the same way you're looking at it in the past? You can't. It's a very different world. So you have two options. You can either create the future or adapt the future.
I
And
love that.
yeah, I mean, those are the real two strategic choices we all have. And neither one is wrong. Neither one is bad. One isn't better than the other. And it's nothing like that. But you need to understand yourself and your organization where you fit. Adapting the future is about being responsive and flexible and agile and being able to work with what the future looks like. And creating the future is about literally you having the courage to carve what the future will look like, regardless of the consequences may be like. Now, everybody will say, oh, I want to create the future. I want to create the future. That's the awesome place to be. Most people are not on that side of the equation, actually on the other side of the equation. Again, it's not about what's right or wrong. It's about how we are programmed in some ways. It could be some of the unique resources we may have access to. It may be some of the unique experiences we have that put us in the position to either adapt or create the future. And that's ultimately the two high-level strategic choices that we have sitting where we sit today.
I absolutely love the way you've just summed that up. I think
Yeah.
as well, the fun thing that I led with that as the leading foot into this conversation is because right now, I think given the topic which I want to speak about, because growth is huge. And
Yes.
right now, with this huge moment where I feel like we've just had this universal shake of the snow globe, it really is a period where we're having to grow both on a personal aspect as well as on an entrepreneurial or business. The government,
Absolutely.
everything around us is having to grow in the shit, quite frankly,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
So
Yes.
before we, well, again, I want to say a big congratulations for the book, Ready,
Thank you.
Set, Growth
Thank you.
Hack, because this really does just throw itself into the rest of this conversation. But
Yep.
Nader, for you, I'd love to kind of break this down. So starting off, let's get people familiar with the term growth hacking. So
Yes.
what does growth hacking mean?
Sure. So growth hacking is essentially putting in less resources to get more out, and we're looking at disproportionate results. What that really means is that I'll put in 1 unit of effort and get 10 units of output on the other end of it, and that's as simple as the definition gets. There's a lot of buzz around the idea of growth hacking, where it sounds very techy and very, digital marketing like and all that. And these are important to understand because they're part of the evolution of growth hacking. But when you look at it, because I look at it from a very holistic and strategic perspective that includes all those things that you've probably heard about, it's important to understand that that's its objective. So I have this diagram I got in my book. You probably see on my site as well, where there's like a little ninja in the middle, and he's got like all these units of things that are not happening, a whole bunch of things happening over here. And so in the middle, the growth hacker, or the growth hacking process is you, right? You're the one who determines the inputs and the disproportionate outputs. And when people hear this, they think like, oh, okay, that sounds like pretty impossible. Well, that's why I call it the growth dilemma. So the whole narrative starts with what I call the growth dilemma, which is essentially it's the nightmare of every entrepreneur, executive. I mean, anybody who's leading something. And this nightmare starts at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the quarter, the month, the day, when you look at your goals and recognize that the resources you have do not meet the ambitions of your goal. Okay. And typically this has been cultivated into pop culture as making poor performance popular. You see it all the time, right? And so people are just finding vanity numbers and ways to kind of work your way around it. If you can do all that and you can get really good at it, I know people who are fantastic at that, but you're never really going to grow until you understand the growth dilemma, which is how do I find disproportionate ways to achieve the result I want with the limited resources I have. So in 2006, I was with a talk with Mike Eisner of Disney, and he introduced this concept about creativity in the box, right? And people in the audience were like shocked. Don't you mean creativity out of the box? And he was like, when you understand your limits is truly when you're most creative. And I couldn't have worded it any better myself. That's exactly when you're at your most creative state. It's not when you say, shoot, I wish I had these resources. It's when you say, this is what I have. This is what I'm going to work with. I'm going to get the most out of it, is when you start on the path of disproportionate results.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So with right now then, with a lot of people are kind of being forced to go inwards within their own personal life, and those who are kind of in the early stages of startup business or SMEs, so to speak, what would you say would be the best place for those guys to start right now? Because there is a lot of change happening. People are being forced to grow. Is there a certain place that you'd recommend people should start with regards to kind of getting clear on what it is that they need to change or grow?
Yep. Well, okay, so that's really broad. It differs on person to person. So the way that I look at it in the process in the book is we call it the growth problem. Okay, so most often it's like you can't solve a growth problem without understanding what that growth problem is. And in most organizations, which would be the same as an individual, my agenda usually would, okay, so an agenda it should be a priority of problems that you should be solving, right? It's not a to-do list. And so if I don't understand what my priority of problems that I'm solving, then I don't really know what my growth problem really is. It's almost like a cause and effect or a fishbone structure where you keep going deeper until you find out but one little part, and then you identify the priorities within that whole fishbone structure. And then you now have an agenda, and now you understand what kind of problem to your growth. We have too many distractions today. And I understand what that's like. So 85% of CEOs I sit with, if I ask them, what are your top 3 priorities right now, they couldn't answer the question. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with lack of disorganization. It has everything to do with distraction. they're so distracted like any other human being, right? I mean, if you look at how long you spend on Instagram and Twitter and all this fun social media stuff, and if you took some of that time and recognized that it could have been used a lot more productively, you start to feel a little bit depressed about how you could have actually used some of that time that you would have used on social media doing something way more productive than that. But this is the era that we live in. It just points out that how much distraction is actually around us. I mean, notifications. One of the tricks that anybody who's obviously knows this when you want to be more productive is put your phone into airplane mode or just outright turn it off. Stop that flow of notifications coming in, and all of a sudden your mind can just focus on what you want to do. So it is a matter of priority and focus, and being able to put it into that agenda, which is your priority order of problems you need to solve.
That's epic. It's interesting because one of the keynotes that I listened to of yours was, I think you dropped the statistic, was it 140 minutes per day of distracted time was the average on social media?
Yeah. It's really crazy, and it continues to just keep going up. So the way the algorithms are designed is digital advertising, which means more and more content. And the better the content gets, the more, well, especially since it's customized to each individual, you just keep consuming and you just don't feel it. So if you go into your stats, and I've done it before, I can't believe how much time I spend in there.
Yeah.
Doing what? Like, what did I just achieve today by spending, the 2-3 hours on Instagram? Absolutely nothing. It's minimal, if at best.
Exactly. Yeah. I love how you turned it around then, and you're like, do you know what? One of the biggest things for growth is actually just killing off distractions. I've said this a few times on this show. One of my first ever mentors made me do this awareness exercise where for every hour I had to set an alarm on my phone. This was years ago when I was highly distracted. And every hour when the alarm went off, I had to journal what I'd done within that hour. Who was I around? What were the tasks I'd done? How effective was I? Like, how did certain environments make me feel? And it was an incredible exercise to make me realize, like, out of my best hours of the day, like how distracted and how much time I was actually wasting in, well, let's put it frankly, like bullshit tasks or bullshit, being on social media. So I think distraction really is a big thing that really needs to be looked at with this.
Big time. And the worst distractions for me have always been sort of administrative tasks that are inefficient, and they get me super frustrated, right? If I have to go fill out some paperwork, and I get it, sometimes it has to be done. I just wish the processes were a lot better, because it just, I'll put it from another way. And it was a conversation I had today. So we were talking about how difficult it is to work from home. I mean, we're all experiencing the difficulty working from home and productivity, et cetera. But what's interesting is today I've had 5-6 different meetings all back to back on Zoom. And so I wouldn't have been able to do that normally, because normally what would happen is I'd have to get into traffic. I'd have to go find some parking, get in the elevator, get up, go to the meeting, come back and repeat. And so what happened, what I've noticed is I took it for granted, as most people have, as I have sort of more physical meetings, I get more frustrated. I get more frustrated with having to be in traffic, more frustrated with having to find parking. And I'm like, man, I could have just spent that time getting something else completely done. I'll tell you something that will surprise you. A large part of my book was written me sitting in airport lounges, sitting in lobbies, literally just typing everything out and getting things organized, because that was the only time I was finding to actually focus. And it was interesting because I found different forms of energies around me that I was able to use as I was in different places. But ultimately, if I didn't use that downtime wisely, I wouldn't have been able to write a book. It wouldn't have happened.
I totally get that. I think going back to that point that we were just speaking about, I think with the new world, like with what's happening right now, it's a lot of people are starting to realize how much time was being wasted in cars, doing the mundane tasks. Whereas yourself, it's just like, I could have just sat at home and been as effective, if not more. But I think as well, another great thing that you touched upon, I did a post on this. It went a little bit nuts the other day, which was how when you are kind of like in that growth mindset, so to speak, you start placing yourselves in locations, environments, and around people where you like naturally find inspiration, even if creativity or flow. Have you found that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, there are places where there's an energy flow, like there's a vibe that I can tap into. And for me, one of the weird ones has been airports, right? It's really weird, but I found like in airports, because and what I determined it to be is that when people travel, they're usually in a positive mood. right? There's a positive energy there, and it's just bouncing around, right? And there's a lot of movement, so it's a flow, and so I tap into that, right? So no, I completely agree with you. I mean, being in isolation is never a good thing, at least not for too long. You do need to get out and you need to tap into those energies. I used to love going to I used to do a lot of mentoring, a lot of the accelerators and incubators where I live. And so just getting in there, the most positive thing for me was the positive energy of all these young entrepreneurs with all these hopes and possibilities and these bold actions they're taking to build a future that's better for them and their families. That's a super positive environment to be in, no matter how challenging it might be, but everybody's working to this positive direction. And so being in those places have a great impact on you.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I'd love to speak about this because I think this is kind of where it merges, and we've never really had this topic on the show. Now, in business, I always say like a business can only grow to the level of the leader, or how to the size of what the leader's willing to grow. Would you agree with that statement? The majority of the business or the product, or so the workforce or the leadership role that's being built really does kind of depend on how well the leader is growing as well. Would you say there's a big correlation there?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about this exact question. So I was at a business dinner, and we had someone. He's a former Apple employee, worked with Steve Jobs, and he asked, like, what's the most important thing that a CEO or leader needs to be able to do? And obviously a lot of technical answers. And so his answer was, understanding cash flow. And I said, well, excuse me, actually, I think the job of the CEO is to get out of the way. And they started laughing. I said, it sounds funny, but that's how I built a lot of my businesses, by putting the right people in certain places and just getting out of the way to let them do what they're doing, because I quickly recognized that I don't want to be the bottleneck, right? And that's, any really good leader of any organization knows that if you've invested in putting the right people in the right place, then why are you getting in their way? You've just wasted your time and money, right? And that requires a lot of trust. I completely get it. You need to, so it's not always, okay, so there's a challenge between kind of like having people you trust and having people who are really good at the job, right? And ideally you need a balance of the two, because you can get some people who are really brilliant but completely destructive, and you can get the complete opposite. So you need a balance of the two. And I've seen instances with some of my clients where you have somebody who gets really good results, but they're completely destructive to the energy of the organization. And it comes to a point where they have to go regardless of the results that that one individual will get, because they're getting in the way of everybody's collective results. And so it's a tough decision for a lot of CEOs, because they're in fear that if this person leaves, that the results of the remaining would not equal or be at the same level, but you won't know until you get the energy out of the way. So ultimately, I think like if the limitation is the leader, the CEO himself, he's got to get out of the way or be removed, or in instances of many startups, just you need to get someone else to run your company for you who would take it to that next level. There's a lot of ego involved in this, right? Where, hey, it's my company. We've seen this over and over again. And I totally get it. Like, I've been in that scenario where you're so passionate about what you do, and you're like, I'm the guy who can just take it there. But what you need to realize is that there are instances and scenarios where you aren't the best person to do it, but you need to be part of the process, right? So dealing with an organization where the founders are involved in it, you'll see in the product or service, there's an absolute difference in the final delivery of whatever it is that whatever it is that they do. So I believe that founders should always be involved, but should they always be leading? There needs to be a judgment call there. And that's to your point, like, are we restricted to the growth of the founder or the leaders themselves? The answer is no, you shouldn't be, actually. Yeah.
One of the things that's jumping into my head, the more that I keep listening to the way that you speak and we speak about these topics, which I completely agree with, it's so important for, not just on a personal sense, but within business as well, to keep aware and clear. Like, clarity and awareness must be the biggest turning points, because especially in growth in businesses, it's not just being clear on the result, but kind of like how it's affecting everything else. So like you were mentioning, it was taking one person to poison the entire team, even though the results were great, what that could have led to in a year.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the accumulation factor of those things can be detrimental to where you're going. So I call it long-term thinking in a short-term world, right? So you have to have a long vision, but you need to have short-term thinking as well combined with it. So ultimately, what that translates into is that short-term action. So I'm going to take short-term action. It's going to have long-term impact. And so if I consistently think like that, although the action may have some short-term thinking involved in it, I have a long-term perspective on where that goes. So this individual may be amazing right now, but he or she is so destructive that in a year from now, she's going to burn out and the results will burn out with her, and I'm going to lose all the people around me and I won't have an organization. You know, it's a lot like, I give you another example. So this happens to me all the time. So I've got like my sales and marketing team, and they come in and they show me this spike, right? So we've got this spike and everyone gets really excited, right? And it's a hit of dopamine, my friend. That's what that is you get super excited about this spike, and then they look at me and I'm not super excited about it, and they're kind of wondering, okay, what's happened to this guy? I say, okay, this is really, here's what I want you to do. I want you to repeat that spike over and over and over again and don't stop. Can you do it? The tone kind of changes, right? So what you're always looking for exponential growth, you're looking for a rising horizon, right? Rising horizon is about keeping it consistently growing, and eventually with time you get that smooth sort of uplift to your organization. These sudden spikes that have these amazing injections of cash, I mean, I get it. It's like doing drugs. I mean, you get that first hit and you're chasing that first experience. It's never the same. So you keep investing more resources in doing it, but you never get the same result. And if you do, you have to put more into it to get the same result. It doesn't work well.
I was looking into, I can't remember what the literature was, and it was on about the reward system, and kind of like we're on about with the hit of dopamine. And it was on about like in successful businesses, athletes, performers, or anyone along like the lines of that, their reward is in the journey and the process, not necessarily the result. The result is the bonus. Yes. And the thing that I love about what you're saying, it's more about like fall in love with the work, the process, and the journey. And if you get the result, that's great, but you'll keep that momentum and that compounding effect more by, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like the process is really, really important. And one of the most vital components of that is learning, right? So if you're not learning, so in my book, I talk about the fail, pass, learn system, and that's how we actually develop growth hacks, right? So a failed attempt is not a failure. It's actually a form of learning. And we have a system in how we actually turn that into a process. And a learning doesn't mean I've actually learned something that's going to work for me right now. It propels me to expand on that, to continue to see if I can continue to make it pass. And if it fails, I start the process again and bring it back in again. So ultimately, I quantified in a really interesting way. So imagine like every day you sit, Simon, and you learn 5 new things. It could be little tiny things. It doesn't matter what it is, but 5 things, right? You do that every single day. In a month, you've got 150 new learnings. If only 5% of those were actionable into something that gave you exponential results, then imagine what happens in the month after that and after that as it keeps compounding. And so through that process, your fail, pass, learn system all of a sudden allows you to understand things that nobody else would know. So people can copy an iPhone, right? I can go cosmetically copy an iPhone. Pretty easy to do. To understand the strategy and the learning behind it to make it work the way it did, you have no clue. It's almost like the first iPhone didn't have apps in it, or not to have the iTunes, so it'd have what would be built in it. It sounds crazy today, but the learning was what took them to the next steps and create them into different services and bundling the different services and so forth. So yeah, the process of learning.
This is why I knew you'd be a great person, because every single topic is leading to something else. I think this is as well like why you see a lot of people get, with what you were saying there in business, a lot of people get freaked out when people are kind of starting to comment, copy a service or a product or something like that. And I'm like, you're only seeing, people can only copy the front end. They can't look at the back end of the system. They don't know what's physically going on. So it might be a short-term copy, but for the long-term duration of it, it's gonna flop.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, they have no idea why you made a sudden left turn at the point you did, but they just copy it, and they have no idea what's coming next, because they can only follow you. So I remember with one of my companies, I had my first copycat, come out and took it to my IP lawyer and he said, "Congratulations, you're now validated and bona fide."
Okay.
It's like, this validates that what you're working actually works, because nobody copies a great idea. They could copy a successful idea. That was one of the first things I learned from my IP lawyer so many years ago. And if it wasn't really worth the copy, they wouldn't do it, right? There has to be a formula of success that they perceive, at least behind it, to follow what you've done, presuming that they can do the same by copying you.
Oh, that's hilarious. It's hilarious, but you're starting to see more and more of it. And I think now with the rise of social media as well, because everyone is highlighting, aren't they? And it's fun that you mentioned about, especially in entrepreneurship, I go to a lot of speaking gigs, I get to speak. And one of the biggest things I notice is people's eyes aren't necessarily focused on their own path or journey. They're very quick to see what everyone else in that industry is doing, even though some of them might be, I would say, like a Ferrari built on a Robin Reliant chassis. Like some of them might just be like falling apart, but it looks great online. I really think, you've got to focus on your own stuff big time. And kind of, that's what I loved about what you were saying before about the whole distraction. I think the distraction aspect makes you lose your own clarity. And I think with everything that we're speaking about here, as soon as clarity goes, you've lost direction of where you can grow or where you're going.
No, absolutely. I mean, you see, you bring up a good point. So my book is a blueprint. It's not a formula. And the reason being is I walk you through a process that you come up with your own success formula. So this idea of a silver bullet doesn't exist. Like there's just one formula that works for everybody. And if you follow it, you will definitely get the same results. That don't ever buy into that. That is not true. You may get similar results, possibly. You may get somewhere, most likely, but are you going to get to the success level that you've been promised? No. The reason being is your circumstances are different. Your timing is different. Your location is different. Everything is different. So you need to be able to pave your own path by creating your own success formula. So a blueprint will help you determine what that formula will look like, but it won't give it to you. And I have a real problem with the get rich quick kind of guys online who are like, listen, this formula works and all you have to do is copy and it's a turnkey thing and I'm going to give you all the, it sounds so good. So many people fall into this. And I just tell people, please, I've been building businesses for 25 years. If get rich worked, I would have been richer much longer ago. I tried it. It doesn't work. It's never worked and it ain't going to work. What is going to work is hard work and working smart about how you go about it. There's no supplement for good old-fashioned hard work. Some of the greatest businesses we see today, they took a decade to build. Google took a decade plus. IBM took many decades. Yahoo, Facebook, they didn't happen overnight. They didn't build this empire in 3 to 5 years. It took them a little under or around a decade to build. Jack Ma of Alibaba said this in one of his famous speeches. He's like, it took me a decade to get me where I am. And if you wanted to build a successful business, plan a decade in advance. And for most people, they're kind of like, whoa, okay, that's way too long. It sounds really long, but if you're actively working and getting results as you move along, that time passes really quick. And it's not like stuck in stone, it'll take 10 years. The point here is that it will take time. Nothing good is built overnight like that. That's not how it's done.
Yeah, I saw something the other day. It was like, I became an overnight success after 25 years of hard work. I was like, oh, I like
that. Yeah. There was a famous author. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he published 15 or 16 books before he just got his first bestseller. And everyone forgot about those first 15 or 16 books. And so people were just talking about how great that one book was. And they asked him, how does it feel? I said, well, I published 15 books prior to this to get where I am right now. It just didn't happen like that. So yeah.
I love that. So look, Nader, with you on the show, I want to kind of get something on here which we can really help our audience with.
Yep.
Understandably, our audience is predominantly like people who are either starting businesses, people who are consciously aware that they've got something that they want to go and do. But more to the point, people who are really kind of like looking inwards. So they're really in the personal growth aspect as well as the business growth side of things.
Yep.
I'd love to speak to someone because I know from the line of work you've done and kind of just everything that I've read about you is you're very good at being able to see what lies ahead, if that makes sense. I'd love to know from you, what do you see with everything that's going on right now? Are there certain opportunities? Are there certain things that people should be looking for? Are there any opportunities? I'd love to get from you what you see the
So
future.
what I see coming, sure. So, okay, so first and foremost, and I was having this conversation this morning as well with someone else, and so he was kind of sizing up budgets in his industry to kind of determine which organizations to go after in his strategy. And I explained to him that you got to understand that consumer spending has gotten weaker, and so has the spending of companies. And so the kind of budgets that you're thinking about, right, prior to this, do not exist at the same levels that you think they do. They will recover with time. But right now, the instance of having to create value has never been more important than now. As strange as that might sound, everyone says, well, of course, we're going to create value. But there's a lot of bullshit out there, right? And so right now, what I believe is if you're a talented individual and you're working really hard and you haven't been getting results, your time is about to come. Your time is about to come because those who cannot perform, who've been holding the space where you were not able to get to, are no longer going to be in those spaces anymore. A banker friend of mine, he puts it into a rather, if you'd forgive me, but a rather crude example. He says, imagine, when you're at the beach and the water goes back, and when the water goes back, you'll see who's naked. And that's what this is about, right? So that's going to happen. So those who are really talented and really good at what you do, fine tune yourself, keep fine tuning yourself, keep learning, and keep consistent with the context and and keeping relevant with how this environment is changing. One of them is tech. Tech is super obvious, right? But I genuinely believe that tech is going to crash. Okay, and the reason I think it's going to crash is
I would not have expected you to say that.
Yeah, I'm a huge tech innovation bias. I have a bias towards it, but I've seen this happen before. And history may not repeat itself in the exact same way, but ultimately, I've seen more people become e-commerce experts that know nothing about e-commerce in the last few months. Warren Buffett has a very good rule for this. He says, when everybody's getting in, get out. And when everybody's getting out, get in. Okay. It's just an old school principle he uses. And I absolutely agree with it because it always applies. So there's so many people getting into it. It's creating like this bubble. Okay. The good news is the people who are really good at and produce something of genuine good value, you stand to do very well. Those of you who are trying to play the space, unless you have something that solves a real problem, like you're solving a serious problem, you can add value, you're in for a good run. If you know you don't fit into that, find something else to do. Finding something else to do is, and this is another problem, tech is really sexy, okay? People love chasing the sexy stuff. The money is in the unsexy stuff. Okay, so an expert in sponsorship in the US, she once told me, she's like, you know who the best sponsors are? I said, who? She said, insurance companies, as an example. Like the most boring, most easiest going, like last thing that you think about. And she said the same kind of thing I'm saying right now, is that the money is where the unsexy stuff is. And the reason being is that people will always pay for someone to do the dirty work, right? People will pay for people to clean up their house. People will pay for someone to clean their car. And of course, that changes with time. But the point is that, that's changing. The other thing is, I think where there's going to be a big play is in agriculture and food, largely because one of the reasons why we're in this problem today is, unfortunately, the food chain has been corrupted with time. So that's my opinion. You can go challenge that with whatever facts you want, and I'll leave it to you to figure it out. Because of that, like we're talking about vaccinations, all kinds of medicine, all this stuff. But if I was eating really good quality food to begin with and keeping healthy, a virus like this wouldn't be really a problem for almost any of us. So, and I'm not talking about diets or specific diets here. That's a different story. What I'm talking about is the actual quality of the input of the food. And a lot of countries have woken up and realized that they're too dependent on somebody else for food. And so there's going to be a rise of nations that are going to become very inward focused, and countries that are highly resourceful, that were not using their resources very well, are going to stand to prosper greatly very soon. And it's going to start with agriculture. Now, here's the thing. When people think agriculture, they're thinking farmers, right? Thinking old school backwards. Okay, so I call this not going back to basics. It's forward to basics. Okay, forward to basics means we have a lot of technology and a lot of advancements and tools that are at our fingertips that haven't been applied to the basics. And if they have been, there's so much more room. That creates massive opportunities that are happening now and will continue to grow. So that would be kind of my high level take on it. This is what I think people need to think about. Some of the obvious stuff is health and education. Massive disruptions taking in these two industries that were not being disrupted enough prior to this. What those disruptions will look like will vary. I believe that e-learning, so e-learning, I had a few investments in e-learning in 1999 and year 2001 in this time. And believe it or not, a lot of what you see today had already existed. Okay, so yes, there's been massive improvements, but the adoption level for e-learning only happened because of a pandemic. This tech was available long ago at extremely cost-effective measures. And so you have your Udemy's of this world and Skillshare prior to the pandemic, they were like this, and then the pandemic hits and it's like this. And so everybody's out there training on whatever it is that they can train. So there's a lot of crap out there. So you have to dig a little bit deeper to get to the gems, but it is what it is.
Would you say, I always think in businesses, and when I really kind of like focusing on things, they go in phases, and there's quite a few correlations in this conversation. What I'm like, would you say sometimes you don't necessarily need to disrupt? It's a case of being able to see in, and where can you optimize? Like, is it an optimization and growth?
Yep. Yeah, so there's no set formula to this, right? It's about what you see and what you believe that you're really good at and can actually pull off. So like you rightly pointed out, it doesn't have to be disrupting a whole industry. That doesn't have to be you. Remember the two options, right? Creating the future and adapting the future, right? So if I was disrupting, I'd be creating the future, and if I wasn't, I'd be adapting the future. Now, adapting the future has a lot of money in it, right? Don't underestimate it. It's about just recognizing how much more responsive do you need to be, or how much more adaptive do you have to be, or how much more lean do you need to be in order to respond to the environment we're in today. So remember, people are a lot more cost conscious than they've been a year ago. People's spending power has gone down. Doesn't mean it's disappeared. It's gone down. And so their habits are changing. So we're sitting at home for many months and we're starting to recognize like there's certain things that are really important that we weren't thinking about before, right? So you may, before, especially in the city I live in, we have almost like a new restaurant. It feels like a new restaurant opens up almost every day. I don't know if that's true or not, but I definitely feel like that.
There are always good restaurants as well where you are.
I know. So you can just keep eating, right? And so like you step back with a pandemic, you're kind of like, do I really need to be eating out all the time? Do I really need to be spending that kind of money? I mean, if we have a bit more time now, why don't we just make our own food at home and it becomes like its own experience? I think we've all kind of gone through that. I got this really funny post once where they have a lineup of master chefs, right? Before pandemic, there's like 3 guys. And then after pandemic, there's like a lineup of people just going, infinite to the end, because people are spending more time at home cooking. But the point is that it helps you get your priorities straight, and you start to really understand like what is important, not important. And your spending habits have also adjusted with that and will continue to adjust with that. And new solutions will pop up, right? So things like the shared economy, so anything that's like shared economy that was like prior to this, they're greatly benefiting right now because they understood these dynamics, not because they expected a pandemic to come, but they had expected that people would be consistently looking for more value and they'd be spending less with time. And when they saw enough value, they may exponentially spend more, which is true, which is absolutely true.
Yeah, I see that. I'd love to go back to something. We mentioned before about the whole disruption and optimization. I think this kind of threads well with what we were just speaking about there. I kind of get the feel in our industries, a lot of people are kind of waiting for that idea to, like the big idea. There's a lot of people sitting around not taking action, waiting for that big thing to come where they can disrupt an industry. Yep. And when I think about it, I had a really good example of this. We held quite a millionaire's retreat over in Cyprus a couple of years ago. And one guy just saw an opportunity in the sauce market and just went all in and created a sauce business selling fish sauce. And he generated, I think it was 38 million in the year selling sauce. And I remember because it came back and I was listening to people reflect on what they'd done. And a lot of the high entrepreneurs, the proud, the, dare I use the word ego-y, those sorts of ones had sat around waiting for this perfect opportunity, this perfect thing to go in and disrupt an industry and become the next Zuckerberg and you know what I mean, the next Bezos. And just this one kid who I never would have expected it just went all in on sauce, unsexy sauce, and completely crushed it.
Yeah, you see, it could be the smallest, little unsexiest thing, and it just takes off. In many cases, it does. So yeah, I mean, so the guys that are waiting are the guys who want to create the future, but are not adapting, right? So those guys are probably the best guys to adapt rather than to create, right? And here's the thing, you're not stuck in a box, by the way. You can adapt to the future, and then along the path, you discover a way to create a new future, right? And that could be sometimes the best way to do it. You know, for me personally, I feel I'm in an era of discovery right now. You know, it's important because my visibility to the future, like many of us, is not as clear as it used to be because of all that's happening. And the best thing to do is stop, do nothing, and just observe, discover, find out what's happening around you. Talk to as many people as possible. Because see, an entrepreneur, and I was telling this to a senior executive recently when we were talking, all of us are problem solvers, okay? When we went to school, we were never told we were being trained to be a problem solver. Your parents never told you you're being a problem solver. Your boss probably never told you you're a problem solver. At the end of the day, we're all problem solvers, and we solve different type of problems at different type of levels. The bigger the problem you solve, the more valuable you become. And so you should always be looking from the lens, what problem is it that I need to solve? Is there enough people who have this same exact problem, and can I actually deliver real value to these people? If you can yes, yes, and yes, further discover, further go deeper. If it's no, it doesn't matter. Move on to the next thing.
Again, the thing that keeps coming back to me through this whole conversation, and I think it's the first few words which we spoke about, was distraction and clarity.
Yes.
It literally, this entire conversation bases on those two things. Are you able to get still enough to go out of the work trenches of what's going on in the world, go up to 30,000 square foot and take a look over yourself, but see what's actually happening in the playing field of industries? And
well, this is the time to do it, because see, here's the weird thing about it, right? Prior to this pandemic, we were all trying to stop the world around us to get focused, right? Now the world around us has slowed down and we're still distracted. What does that tell you? There's a problem with the world or a problem with you? It's a problem with us individually, right? So there's no better time. You know, like, I'll give you a good example. Summertime is some of the best time for me to get productivity and out throughout the whole year. First, I can probably get meetings with the most busiest people in the summertime, believe it or not. Planning and getting some of really clear thoughts in July and August have been some of the most productive months when people are just relaxed and taking off and just like, hey, you know what, I'm unplugging. I find that's actually the best time for me to get things done. I end up taking my time off in September and October, which is completely counterintuitive because most people are like, well, that's when the business season starts. I think, oh, well, my business season already started. I've got what I needed done. It gave me that space, right? So that's where we are today, right? You know, we're in an extended July and August right now, but yeah, that's where we are today.
It just keeps coming back to me. I just keep coming over to those two things. I was like, this period really is the period to just go in, get still. Yes. Like, can you disconnect? Are you aware of the things that you're distracting? Like, why can you not sit still and listen?
Yeah,
I really, it's incredible. And the thing that I love about your messaging and everything that we've spoke about, like, I came into this conversation loaded with what are the things to grow, like not just in a business sense, on a personal sense. And the fun thing, what I've loved about the way you speak is it's not necessarily adding more things into the box. Yes, that is a tool, but are you optimizing the things you have already got?
Yeah.
Instead of spinning more plates, what have you got around you? And can you optimize and grow those things to compound everything else?
Yeah. 100%. There was a tech company it was about year 2000. I'd stepped into the board level to help them kind of rearrange what they're doing. And we started analyzing how much percentage of the actual software features were being used. And we found that only 15% of the functions were extremely active. The remaining 85 were more or less muted or dormant. But the R&D that was being spent in enhancing this product was very focused on those 85%. And so as logical as it sounded, it just didn't add up internally. And so we had to put a campaign internally to recognize the idea that that 15% where the features are highly being used, that's actually where we need to focus to enhance, because that's where people will recognize the most value, not ignoring the remaining 85. You're obviously not going to throw it right out. What you're going to do is you got to focus where people are consistently getting value. And they ended up discovering several new products that came out as a byproduct because of their focus on just that 15%. And they've been on this route of spending on this 85% in R&D for a good 7 years. So you can't even begin to imagine how much time, money, and effort and talent was just going into the air, just purely just going into the air.
It's incredible, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
It's just, this is the thing that I love about this conversation. It's just find the small things that amplify the big things. And I think if so many of us adopted, like even myself, like I think if I was to adopt that mindset more in my own life, how much easier things would be. Instead of trying to go out there and learn and pick at new things or maybe start new businesses, just look at what you've already got. How can I optimize X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, no, I always say the biggest opportunities are not the ones in front of your eyes. The biggest opportunities are under your nose. So stop looking and start smelling. And so if you change your mindset about stop looking and start smelling, you start to see things very differently, because you start looking at literally what you have and what's around you and how to utilize. That's back to what I was talking about Mike Eisner when he said creativity in the box, right? It's about the limitations that really juice the best out of you, actually. It's frustrating, but that is how it works. And that's what gets the best of you. So when I start with a client, I always say, let's start with the limits first. And they're kind of surprised. I said, but aren't we looking at unlimited possibilities? I said, absolutely. The only way I can get to the unlimited possibilities is by understanding where the limitations are first. And then we're going to open up to all the possibilities. And they're like, does that really work? That doesn't sound very logical. And I said, let's go through the process and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Because at the end of the day, we need a result, right? We need actual traction. Otherwise, it's just a conceptual conversation that doesn't go anywhere.
I love how you've just mentioned this. I always say when it comes down to, this is the thing, like in that line, when it comes down to like goal setting, it's very, like I always use the analogy of monkey bars. So on monkey bars, you are face forward, you've got one hand in front of you, you've got one hand behind you. And I think a lot of the time we don't realize what the limits are. And it's actually that letting go of the one that we can't see that actually allows us to excel.
Exactly.
So I think that's a major thing, how we need to really focus in on our limits. I think a lot of us know what we want, but we don't know what's in the way.
Yeah, 100%.
Or in your language, was it we don't know the problem?
Yeah, we don't know the problem. Yeah, many times we don't know the problem, misperceive the problem. This happens with most of my clients. And if there's anywhere that we add value the most when we enter with a client is if 50% of it is the problem, and the remaining the remaining next 25% is the execution. The last 25% is ensuring that the execution has value. So if in that 50% you're scoping out the problem was done very well, the chances of success are much, much higher.
What would you say from obviously your work consulting in businesses, building businesses and things along the lines of that, and working with leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, the works? Is there a common correlation? Because I can imagine you're a man that sees correlations, like you see it, if that makes sense. Do you see common correlations in why businesses don't grow? Is there like certain things that you keep seeing again and again and again? What are the main ones? I'd love to know.
Well, see, when the premises of my book was exactly on that, which is why certain companies grow and why do certain other ones don't grow. If there was like one factor that the individuals who run companies that grow do not think with limitation. They're limitless. You almost feel like you're talking to a superhero who you think is completely delusional. Okay. And the conversation may sound delusional, but the reality is that if this individual knows how to bring resources, ideas, and capabilities into one balanced perspective, which they do learn with time, with a limitless mindset, they grow. They grow because whatever hurdle they hit, they'll already see it before it comes, and they'll have solutions to deal with it. Those guys who have limitation, okay, so it's not limitation of thinking, but self-limiting beliefs, right? Like I can't do it, or all these reasons. I mean, everyone's got like at least 10, 20 reasons why they cannot do something, right? People who are limitless have 10, 20 reasons why they can do it. And even if it doesn't exist, their imagination is so powerful that it's so powerful in their mind that its existence is almost manifested.
The person who springs to mind as you're saying that is Elon Musk for me. I watched this, I think it was Becoming Tony Stark or something like that on YouTube. It's about an hour-long documentary. I just remember watching the whole thing. I was like, this guy just, there is like the portion of his brain which either has fear or sees limits and obstacles. It doesn't exist. It's like just everything's so. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's it. And also at the same time as like he calls it, he's like, this is what we're going to do. Everyone called him stupid at the beginning and, you know, with PayPal and all that sort of stuff. But his actions have completely followed suit with everything.
Proven otherwise. Exactly. Yeah, people do think you're nuts in the beginning. Like it happens all the time. I mean, I've been in situations where we're disrupting an industry and people would look at you and laugh like, you're going to do that? And you look at me and say, yes, I am. Yeah. You have a problem with that? Oh, no, come back to me when you do it. And I say, well, by the time I come back to you, I don't need you. Your opportunity with me is right now. It's pretty simple. Exactly. It's pretty simple. So either they get it or they don't, right? It's how it is.
The thing that I love about that is when again, thinking back to the Elon Musk story is with PayPal. So he always knew he was going to do something in space and with rockets, but how he had to, the businesses he had to create for him to actually do what he wanted to do. Yes. I think is just remarkable. Like most people struggle to get one big hitting business off the floor. Yeah, we've got PayPal, Tesla, we've got Neuralink, and they're meaningful. Bit like they are really life-changing, universally disruptive ideas as well. What he's doing, so remarkable.
100%. Yeah, a lot to be learned. I totally agree.
I'd love to know what's next for you. I can get the impression you've got some amazing things in the pipeline. So I'd love to know what's next for you, Nader.
Well, what's next for me is I'm working on my Growth Ninja School, which I was talking about. So I've recognized that there's an education barrier or gap, I think is a better way to put it when it comes to growth, right? What is growth? I mean, what is growth hacking? How does it work? And so I've been working with some of the top minds in the field in the last couple of years. And some of the things that some people have done to accelerate growth for disproportionate results will just blow your mind away. And I'm trying to create a way.
I really want to know what.
Can we get any ultimately? Everybody wants to know, like, well, what do I do today to accelerate what I'm doing in small actions and big impact? And ultimately, the school that I'm setting up is very difficult to do, but I'm doing my best to make it work in a productive way, to help train people to how to think strategically about it, how to implement it, and then get the right tools in place. So whether you want to be a consultant helping people do this, you want to do it for your own startup company, or you work for a company and you want to grow from a career perspective by bringing disproportionate results, irrelevant of which of those those buckets you're in, those are the kinds of people that I'm kind of trying to work with to help them create exponential growth. So that's where I am right now. On the other side, I'm on a completely exploratory level. I am observing certain things very carefully: agriculture, technology. I am looking at health and education, trying to understand where some of these things are really going. So today, I definitely don't jump into things like I would prior to the pandemic. I step back and have many more conversations than I would have normally had, which has been awesome because you meet some really amazing people, but you get to see things from completely different perspectives all the time. And that's part of the discovery process that I'm in at the moment. I'm trying to see what that looks like. And one of the things as kind of a last note, when I walk into an organization, and I do this for myself, of course, is the starting point of creating a mindset of growth is by one statement, which says, I don't know. Okay. So the way to clear your mind and work from a blank paper and really, really grow is when you say, I don't know, but I will find a way. By the way, I'm going to flow towards it. Okay. And what that means is that when I say I don't know, it removes all the ego, because you walk into a place and you want to solve these problems and you have all these things in your mind, like, I know what to do. I've tried this. I've seen this guy try that. This is what the benchmark says. This is what the research will show. Out, blank paper. I don't know, but I'm going to experiment.
Is it a case of like become the dumbest person in the room?
No problem. If it makes you millions, you can be the most dumbest guy in the room. No problem. It's a mindset. And you'll find that some of the most intelligent people in the world that you sit with will probably end up asking you more questions and giving you more answers because they themselves work like that. I don't know about this. I mean, what is your perspective on this? And so they're consistently feeding their ability to experiment and find where real growth is, because like phenomenal growth comes from the most unexpected places. And you won't find it by looking for it in the most expected ways or having the answer prior to. It's when you say, I don't know, and I'm going to find a way to get to it. That's when you find those golden nuggets.
But you'll only see it when you're not distracted. And
Yeah.
you're getting clear. It always comes back. Yep. It always comes back.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a tough one, especially nowadays. It's very tough, but not impossible. Not impossible. Yeah.
So Nader, look, where can people get the book? I strongly urge that everyone goes over to your YouTube channel. I mean, when we were doing the research on you, I've spent hours on there going through all of your content. So I really urge that people go over to your YouTube channel and give that a follow. But where can people find out more about you? Where can people, where do you hang around online?
They can go to my site, which is nadersabry.com, NADERSABRY.com. If you go to Amazon, you can put in Ready, Set, Growth Hack or my name, and you'll find we have it in 4 formats. So it's print, hard copy, paperback, ebook, and audio. Recently, we put it in audio, which has been awesome. Tons of people were demanding it, so you can get it in audio now. And then on YouTube and Instagram, you can go ahead and follow me there. I try to keep current with as much content as possible. I put intriguing questions on Instagram to get people stimulated to think about growth. So definitely jump into the conversation. If you've got an idea you want to share with the audience, by all means, reach out to me.
Nader, look, it's been incredible having you on. I'd love to round this conversation up with asking you the question, like, if you could put a message out there, or you could send a text message to every single person in the world that would maybe help them grow or move forwards in this time of global mess, or this global shitstorm, whatever you want to call it, what would be the message which you would speak
towards? I would tell people that impossibility is impossible.
Short and sweet. I love it.
Impossible is impossible. You're left nothing with possibility when you look at it like that. That's what incredible. You need to be looking at. Yeah.
Nader, also, I'd love to know this from you. What does it mean to you to be able to lead a nourished life?
Well, I'm happy to be alive today. Let me put it like that. Sometimes people see it in a kind of a joking way. How you doing? I say, I'm happy to be alive, and it's a blessing to be alive. And seeing what's happened to so many people in the last 6 months, I am genuinely just happy to be alive. It's having the ability to wake up every morning and pursuing what you want to do is an amazing blessing in itself. And being alive and breathing and being able to go do that is a massive blessing. We take it for granted, right? It's like, it's default, let's move on to the next thing. But it's not. It's not. If there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, thankful to be alive.
Exactly. I think I always think that people don't really realize, like, we've got the pandemic, which is all that. But then when you really scale out of the fact we're stuck on a rock that's spinning around a ball of fire in the middle of space at 11 miles a second, it's like, when you take things into perspective, it's like, do you know what I mean? We've got a lot.
You've got a lot, 100%. 100%. Yeah. We have a lot more than we need to step back and be a little bit more grateful. And I can imagine why we're distracted, right? When you're less distracted, you kind of start counting back and be like, I'm really grateful for this. I'm grateful for this opportunity for us to speak, of course. And I'm grateful for the fact that, so many things led up to this ability to have this conversation and reach out to your audience. We need to step back and just be a little bit more grateful even for the little tiny things. It's a good reminder even, I'm happy when people remind me as well, when they say, you should be more grateful towards this. I say, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for the reminder, because it is important. We do forget these things as we move along with life. It's how things are.
I agree. I think especially with obviously speaking on the topic of growth, I think one of the biggest things I've learned in my own experience is just gratitude really is a key tool in your arsenal. And once you start catching those small wins daily and you're grateful for those small wins, they really start to stack up and compound very, very quick.
Big time.
Very quick.
Big time. Yeah. Big time.
Nader, look, it's been incredible having you on.
Thank you.
The spacepreneur. But look, I really wish we could have had a lot more. I know we'll get you on again 100% and speak about a lot more. But look, it's absolutely incredible. I love the way your mind works. It's remarkable, very unique. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me today. Thank you very much, Simon.